My great-great-grandmother Laurie's back. Don't speak to me of values or justice or righting wrongs until you are able to feel the heartache of my great-grandfather Graham, whose father may be his master. Don't speak to me of equity or opportunity or the common good until you are able to hear the fear from my grandmother May as the only black woman in her college. Don't speak to me of passion or longing or standing on the side of love until you know the shame felt by my mother Edwina, mocked by teachers for the curve of her back. Don't speak to me of together or understanding or empathy until you know my rage as a young actor hearing the direction to be more black, more male. The pain you are trying to heal has no real name. This pain you speak has no story. It is anonymous, vague, and empty. Don't speak to me of healing, for I heal the second I am ripped apart. My wounds self-suture. And like the clever creature I am, I just grow new legs to outrun the pain forever. It's something I have had to practice for generations that feel like an eternity. So please don't speak to me of healing, because you cannot know what healing means until you know the hurt. Stay with me now. I'm your minister. There are several goals I hold in my mind as I enter this pulpit every Sunday. The first is to rest in my humanity, to bring the fullness of myself into this room, allowing for vulnerability, for embarrassment, for sadness and grief, self-reflection, and perhaps above all, humility. My hope being that if I am real with both myself and with you, that you can be so with me, and that we can begin to build an honest and meaningful relationship that way. The second goal that I bring in mind when I enter this pulpit is the power of using a prophetic voice. A prophetic voice means speaking to how the world, how our congregation ought to be, rather than how we are. It means reaching into the future and pointing out where that arc of the universe finally bends towards justice. It means naming difficult truths, and in order to do that, I will at times make you uncomfortable. In fact, the Board of Trustees hired me to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, as the saying goes. This does not mean I like you, the community, this faith, or this world any less, only that I love you enough to see our potential. I hope to balance both of these goals today, my humanness and my prophetic voice, for this difficult topic. I have this friend I went to school with, divinity school, named Nicole. She was sharp. She didn't take crap from anyone. And she had a passion and authenticity you could feel for miles. When the hospital I worked at was hiring another chaplain, I reached out to her and asked if she'd like to interview. We ended up sharing an office where we fought over the thermostat several times a day. We laughed so loud and so often the unit director around the corner from us literally installed a light-up sign from the ceiling that said, "Shh." We cried together almost as much. For our patients, for school shootings and police shootings, for family drama and work stress. I admire her, I am inspired by her, and I continue to learn from her. So you can imagine my initial excitement when she told me once that she had seriously considered becoming a UU minister while in divinity school. She explained that while she felt like the theology matched her well and she was energized by the social justice element of our faith, she had been told by another UU minister of color that being black in the UUA would be really, really hard. And did she really want to fight that fight every day? Ultimately, she chose not to. Ouch. She would have made a fine UU minister. In Unitarian Universalist congregations across the world, we speak to our profound and meaningful history of racial justice initiatives. We recall our work as abolitionists, calling for the end of slavery in America. We bring to mind our effort in World War II rescuing Jews from Nazi-occupied countries. We take pride in our answering Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call to join him in Selma. We do not take lightly the lives, both UU and of color, that were lost there. We tout ourselves as progressive, liberal religion, dedicated to fighting voter oppression laws that target people of color, and aware of the privilege that comes naturally with lighter skin tones. We task our ministers with devoting themselves to the goal of nurturing an ARAOMC, anti-racism, anti-oppression, multicultural faith system. We try so hard to fulfill the promise of standing on the side of love. But we are a human institution with human failures. We, like every other living, breathing organization, are susceptible to societal influences that seep into our structures without our awareness. Influences that are ingrained in us from the moment we become conscious of the distinction between self and not self. And over the past 2 months, this has been called to our attention again as UUs. For those of you who are unaware of the national debate within our congregations right now, I will summarize it by stating that there was a tremendous amount of discussion occurring around the topic of the hiring practices within the headquarters of our faith, following the hiring of a new Southern Region team lead. I don't want to go into details here, and personally, I don't think the details matter at this point. What matters is that the hire opened a door for deeper reflection into how white supremacy culture affects even the institutions with the most noble of intentions. But I will share that ultimately, it led to the premature departure of the president of the UUA, as well as 3 additional senior staff members. As a side note, in my honest opinion, this appears to be a regretful response to a genuine call to action. This is not the first time our faith has been called to task for our human flaws. Last year, I preached on the empowerment controversy in the late 1960s, a time when the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association began to examine what it meant to be a Black American and be a UU at the same time. Spoiler alert, it did not end well. Today, the world and our faith have changed significantly, and yet in many ways we are just where we started. While there was no easy answer for the empowerment controversy, I think it's fair to say the white leaders of the UUA found it difficult to see past their own feelings about our polity and governance in order to advocate for the needs of Black UUs. Following the murder of Trayvon Martin, the UUA seemed to make racial justice a primary focus again, and tentatively at first and then bolder stepped into the waters of the Black Lives Matter movement. Many UUs have struggled to support this movement, perhaps some of you, and many like us have chosen either not to discuss hanging a banner or to simply ignore it. But now the Black lives of UU who believe that when Black lives matter, all lives will matter, have asked congregations to stop what they're doing and address white supremacy within our organization. Why white supremacy, as the term used here? I'd like to read from Reverend Krista Tave's reflection to address this. We've been trained to see white supremacy as an overt expression of racism, replete with burning crosses, white hoods, Confederate flags, lynchings, and angry white people shouting racist words. This allows liberal whites to distance themselves from racism and believe that we aren't a part of it. But white supremacy is way bigger than the way we've been trained to understand it. White supremacy is a way of thinking that devalues the experiences, insights, and lived reality of people of color. The consequences of this thinking have the real-life impact of denying people of color a real voice with real power. Rarely in this culture, explicit or even conscious in liberal white communities, it's implicit and unconscious. In liberal white communities, white supremacy is implicit and unconscious. It is brave to call white supremacy what it is. That's why we're using the word. In fact, it sets us apart from most liberal institutions, which are in complete denial about the power of racism to shape their decisions and their processes. There is not one institution in this country that is not shaped by white supremacy, and that includes institutions run by people of color. We have all been indoctrinated into white supremacy thinking. There's no reason to feel shame or fear. It is not your fault. You are not stained. We are not irredeemable. Our Universalist heritage says that no one is left behind. Let's anchor in that promise. In summary, in 2017, actual white supremacists are not required in order to uphold white supremacist culture. In fact, go ahead and open your order of service today and find the image of the triangle we included. I'm sorry if it's small print. Some of you might have seen this image before, but it's always worth another look. I think this image outlines the very point I just made. I dare say none of us find ourselves at the top part of the triangle, I hope. We hopefully do not use racist language. We are not practicing Klansmen. We do not burn crosses and intentionally harass or intimidate people of color. But just because we don't live at the top of the iceberg does not mean that we do not participate in a culture built on white supremacy. I can say almost all of us, including myself, can identify some part in the lower half of the triangle that we have taken part in, sometimes without ever knowing it was a socially acceptable form of white supremacy. In fact, being white means that we engage in many of these items on the bottom section before we even realize the implications. Oftentimes, they must be pointed out to us before we understand. And we are taking part in this national UU teach-in on white supremacy because someone pointed out that the UUA was operating on the bottom of this triangle in concern with their hiring practices. It stinks. It's painful. But I, for one, am grateful it was called to our attention. Being anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural takes work as an institution. It means challenging the norm. It means redefining the norm. And we cannot claim to champion ARAOMC ideals if we are not examining ourselves and our operations first and foremost. Like our 7 principles, it begins within ourselves. I'd like to share a story of how hard this work of tearing down white supremacist culture can be sometimes. Because the moment we think we have it down pat is oftentimes the very moment we realize we are just beginning to understand it. During my training to become a chaplain, I spent a year at Emory visiting patients and working with other residents to clarify our roles, our callings, and the practical hands-on aspects of being a chaplain. But the most important thing we did with our time was the interpersonal work we did together. The group of residents is intentionally as diverse as you can make it, and we met for about 15 hours each week with one another, presenting our interactions with patients and receiving honest feedback about how our work was progressing. We were, through what was essentially intense group therapy, taught to recognize our own personhood, our own identities, histories, traumas, values, and prejudices. Anything that would inform our interactions with the other. We shared all of these things that are hidden in the deepest recesses, the things we cannot mention out loud because we've never felt safe enough to, or perhaps because we never knew they were there. We shined a light on them together. It could be at once incredibly powerful and incredibly contentious work, but the goal being simply enlightenment. In my group was a woman I'll call Anne. Anne was an African-American woman, a term she preferred over the term black. She was in the later half of her life and identified as same-gender loving. She was, on paper, we were obvious allies. She was very liberal socially and in her theology, but in practice we were oil and water. One day in group, Anne recalled an interaction she and I had that was deeply painful to her. We were waiting for an elevator along with a large group of other students, and having realized I was giving a ride to several of the residents still inside the room, I decided to wait to take the next elevator so we wouldn't get separated. Anne, who was on her way home and didn't need a ride, stepped into the elevator, not realizing my internal processing, and had a look of confusion when I didn't step on beside her. I caught her look and told her I was going to be taking the next elevator. She awkwardly hopped off, not really knowing what to do in that moment, presumably to wait with me. The remaining students arrived, we caught the next elevator, and Anne waved goodbye as we all parted. During our meetings the next week, Anne shared that she experienced this event, me not stepping onto the elevator with her, as motivated by racism. It shocked me. After attempting to argue that it was definitely not racially motivated, I became so upset I left the room in tears to cool down. When I returned, my supervisor, also an African-American woman, expressed her disappointment with me. I thought, what did I do? Wasn't I the one who'd been wrongly convicted here? But she was disappointed not because she perceived my actions as racist. On the contrary, actually. She was disappointed because I left when I was challenged. Because I wasn't able to see past my own pain in order to see into my colleagues' pain. My mentor later told me through my frustration that Anne would be the greatest lesson I never wanted to learn. And as it turned out, that's 100% the truth. True, my action in this event was not racially motivated, but I was so caught up in having the word racist thrown at me that despite the wrong assumptions on her part, I couldn't look at her and say, that must have been incredibly painful for you. Tell me where this pain comes from. If I had simply stopped and done this, I would have learned that having grown up at the time she did, actions like this, 9 out of 10 times, were racially motivated. They were absolutely as painful as she made it out to be. When I walked away, I made it about my own pain, my own discomfort of being labeled with something I disagreed with, when in reality, I was experiencing white fragility and white flight, as I later learned. The inability to sit and hear the pain of people of color, the need to escape from it. It's a privilege they don't get to experience in their lifetime. Am I a white supremacist because of this? No. But again, one needn't be a white supremacist in order to uphold white supremacy. Truthfully, I couldn't understand that lesson then. In fact, Anne pushed me all year long, and I left my time so exhausted and angry at the situation that it took me a year to reflect back on it without being overcome by anger and hurt. That was 5 years ago, though, and the emotional response transformed from hurt to appreciation. At least once a week, I learn and relearn about who I am, where I come from, and where I hope to be based upon those interactions with Anne. The UUA seems to be experiencing now what I did with my residency. It's doing that deeply painful, powerful, and transformative work of self-reflection. It's acknowledging its assumptions, its unconscious bias, its history of upholding white supremacist culture, whether it wanted to or not. And I hope that, like me, we will be able to move past our hurt and anger and into that appreciation and understanding. Ministers in Black Lives of UU have called for 20% of our association's leadership to be filled with people of color by 2020. If we claim a desire to be multicultural, we must start with those positions of power and leadership. This inspires the necessary changes in order to not just attract people of color to our congregations, therefore making our churches richer and more diverse, but inspire deep, systemic, and cultural changes throughout our association at large. This would allow us to better serve our congregants of color and the world. As I mentioned in my newsletter article, this is truly walking the walk, living into our values and ensuring we do not risk that historic killer of organized religions, hypocrisy. I've been astonished at the way this congregation has risen to a challenge each time one's been presented, spiritually, emotionally, financially, and socially. Each time I've asked you or the world has called for it, you've used your voice and the power and influence of this church to speak for the voiceless, empower and support the oppressed, and above all, spread the message of love and progressive religion to anyone needing to hear it. I want to ask you to consider the ways in which you participate in white supremacist culture. In what ways have you found yourself on the bottom half of that triangle? I look around at the pews and know that there are many complex issues contributing to why most, if not all, seats are filled with white bodies here. Some of them, like the fact that Lumpkin County is a vastly white county, are out of our control. But in what ways could we be more welcoming to people of color? In what ways can we invite them to be with us that does not tokenize their presence, that does not relentlessly request them to educate us on our own racial ignorance, that does not make assumptions about who they are and what they may need from our community? Questions are complex, and we will almost always screw up from time to time. We will say and do things that we will later regret, and that just comes with the territory. But if we can make a commitment to learn from them and do better in the future, I think that's the goal. It's my sincerest hope that the next time a Nicole comes around, the UUA will be transformed, and there won't be a minister of color that would warn her against pursuing ministry. And it's my hope also that when a congregant of color comes to one of our congregations, they will see faces in the pews that look like theirs. They will see leadership of color. They will hear ministry that welcomes their experiences, and they will feel worship that speaks to their spirits. And that together, we live up to the expectation of our faith ancestors laid before us. They knew that Unitarian Universalism was worth the struggle, and I hope you do too. May it be so. Amen. For our closing words today, we have a litany from Dr. King's final speech delivered April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis. It's too long to print for each of you, so when I motion to you, I want you to say with great gusto, "I wouldn't stop there." Something is happening in Memphis. Something is happening in our world. And you know, if I were standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general and panoramic view of the whole of human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, "Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in?" I would take my mental flight by Egypt, and I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness and onward the Promised Land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would move on by Greece and take my mind to Mount Olympus, and I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assembled around the Parthenon, and I would watch them around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality. But I would not stop there. I would go on, even to the great heyday of the Roman Empire, and I would see developments around there through various emperors and leaders, but
I wouldn't stop there.
I would even go by the way of that man for whom I am named, his habit. And as I would watch Martin Luther, as he tapped his 95 Theses on the door of the Church of Wittenberg, but I wouldn't stop there. I would come on up even to 1863 and watch a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but
I wouldn't stop there.
I would come up even to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, but
I would not stop there.
Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Now that's a strange statement to make, because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in a way that we, in some strange way, are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up. And wherever they are assembled today, the cry is always the same. We want to be free. Join me in saying, Amen.
Amen.